Hello, everybody. Happy Monday. Hopefully everyone had a wonderful weekend. Apologies, I'm running a little bit behind of my noon start time. Busy morning with some great client conversations and even kind of a bridge of some conversations I've been having behind the scenes, bringing to you guys here with our Learn with Flow time, especially in this month of August. If you've been following along with our Learn with Flow series, we've taken a little bit of a 180 direction from some of our usual content of a lot of the physical body stuff. And don't get me wrong, we're going to go back there because I'm going to nerd out all day long with you guys about the physical body stuff, whether it's hormones and blood sugar, nutritional strategies, lifestyle, exercise, supplementation, estrogen dominance, menstrual cycle. I mean, you name it. We're going to tackle all of the physical body stuff, but I wanted to take a little bit of a detour here in the month of August and talk about a side of functional medicine that I don't think is recognized very widely. Definitely not widely recognized or respected in the conventional medicine model, but that's kind of to be expected, right? With the conventional model just doesn't have the bandwidth or the capacity to do all of that. So in the functional field, I would hope that that would be more prevalent, right? This whole uniting together a brain-body approach. But I think even as I've been in more of the functional field, I've noticed that that's not always the case either, right? We can get a lot of what I would call like a greenwashed conventional medicine that people are calling functional medicine. And if you saw my latest reel this weekend, I talked about just that. We're talking about people that were personally victimized by a greenwash conventional medicine, which is really just a fancy way of saying like, no, this is conventional medicine just like wrapped under this like functional medicine umbrella because we're still out there trying to give people like a different supplement for every symptom, or we're trying to run like labs on labs on labs before we even address some of the like foundational stuff first around nutrition and lifestyle and nervous system regulation. Or we're putting people on these like super healing protocols that are restrictive and depriving. And I'm like, that's anything but healing. If anybody understands how the nervous system and the body and brain work together as a whole, like that is like the opposite of healing, right? We're never going to be able to bypass the physical body in attempts to unite everything, but it has to function together. And so I think in this world, I want to kind of help you guys navigate these weird dichotomies between this like functional medicine and conventional medicine, and where do we want to use each side for its own strengths, but also recognizing where each side might have some weaknesses. And I just have seen more and more in this field where it's like, that's not functional medicine. I'm like, I don't ascribe to like what they're doing or how they're practicing. I'm like, you're just practicing conventional medicine and greenwashing it. Like it's not anything to write home about, right? So in this month of August, I've been trying to let you guys in on a little different side of the journey of what I consider a true functional or holistic medical model, or let's just be real, what I kind of define as like true medicine. Like who cares if it has a name to it, but like how should we be thinking and caring for and treating the human body? It really should be a total body approach. We can't just like cut the head off at the neck and not join together this brain and body experience. So that's what we've been diving into. For all my nerds out there that have been following along, it's really falling under this umbrella and topic that we call neuropsychophysiology. Really just a fancy way of saying like our brain does impact like the physical health of our brain impacts our thoughts and our beliefs, and our thoughts and our beliefs do impact our physical body. But this is also a bi-directional relationship, which we'll talk about today. The physical body also tells our thoughts and our beliefs what to believe and impacts our physical brain, right? So I think more like historically have always treated and thought about the brain as something that's like its own entity. It's completely separate. The brain communicates to the body, but the body doesn't communicate to the brain, right? And we've really come to the point now where we have completely debunked that, and we now know it's more of a bi-directional relationship. So that's really what I wanted to dive into here in our series here in the month of August. So if you've been following along, we've been talking a lot about the mindsets for success. We've been talking a lot about how we as humans digest information, but then we have to know how do we assimilate and implement the right information for us to really lead to a transformation. And then last week, we really got to dive even deeper into a specific mindset that I've seen more and more frequently, and probably most people's kind of Achilles heel, which is that perfectionist trap, right? And so we're going to build on those conversations today as we dive into something that I think is very unique to a lot of my experience and my history of working in different fitness and wellness modalities, and joining this kind of like brain and body, going back out of the brain and into the body as we talk about resonance training today. And that's going to lead us into a lot of nervous system talk. So I hope you guys are ready for all of that. So just as a little bit of a background information of where a lot of these conversations come from is I've seen and had the blessing of working with hundreds of individuals in my practice at this point. And I've seen so many people that physically on paper were doing a lot of things correctly, right? From nutritional choices, lifestyle interventions, sleep, recovery, exercise, movement, right? They feel like from a physical body perspective, they come to me and they're like doing everything right. I'm not saying that there's not some tweaks that we need to make or maybe some misunderstandings of some things, but for the most part, by and large, when it comes to their physical body, they're getting a lot of some of those foundational things in place. But I have seen for many people, the physical side isn't enough, right? It's not enough to just like chronically be dieting, trying to change our body composition. It's not enough just to like slap some topical treatments on top of acne or use antibiotics for things like gut issues or mood stabilizers for things like anxiety. It's like, we can't just put the pressure on the physical body, right? Those are all methods of like more conventional medicine that have failed us because they just are the physical body. So for many, the physical isn't enough, and that's because we're neglecting to respect the role of that brain-body connection, or more of that like neuropsychophysiology connection, okay? And it was really about like the 1960s, 1970s, up until then, which if you think about it, in the world of medicine, that's not that long ago, right? We're looking at 50 years ago that we really started to recognize that this is not just a one direction show. This is not just the brain talking to the body and the brain dictates everything that happens in the body. It's really the work of a lot of these psychophysiologists of the 1960s and 1970s that we still use today, that we now confidently know that there's a bidirectional relationship between the body and the brain and the brain and the body, right? So when we recognize that this communication works both ways, we can start to get back into the body in order to change the brain, and we can use the brain to change the body. Those two can work together synergistically. And that's because the one thing that unites the brain and the body is something physical called the vagus nerve, right? Not Vegas as in like go roll the dice in Vegas, like VEGAS. The vagus nerve is VAGUS, and actually comes from the Latin root vagus means wandering, right? So this wandering nerve, and that's because this nerve physically starts at the base of your brain and it branches out and innervates pretty much every single major organ in the body. Right? So that's why we call it like wandering, because it wanders and ventures into innervating our heart and innervating our lungs, innervating our diaphragm, innervates our gut, right? So there's so many messages that the vagal nerve is passing from the brain to the body, but also signals that the body is passing along to the brain to try to overall change how those two halves are communicating with each other. So the vagal nerve controls a whole host of different things, usually that we talk about under like unconscious control or subconscious control, controlling things like heart rate, respiration, digestion, reflexive actions like coughing, swallowing, even sneezing, right? All of these things are really part of that whole vagal nerve or that brain-body connection, right? So when you start to think about the fact that there's a physical nerve fiber that runs from the brain all the way down to the body and the body back to the brain, it helps us start to put this together, that this is not one of those stories or situations where we can just chop the head off at the neck and just work on the brain in isolation, right? I was just 10 minutes ago having a conversation with one of my clients who is a mental health therapist, right? So she gets this, and we got an opportunity to really talk about that, of how limiting that model can be, because she has to see individuals that are in a state of threat, right? Their body is in a state of like fight, flight, or freeze, right? We'll talk about the nervous system. And even to her, she was like, I can't even do my best therapy work with somebody that is stuck in fight or flight, right? Because they're not suggestive. We can't retrain new neural pathways. We can't learn new ideas or explore new tools to manage our emotions if someone is like pegged, right? So this is where I feel so freaking passionate about the world of just like medicine, whether you want to call it conventional, Western, alternative, functional, I don't care what you call it. We have to start uniting the brain and the body, because I think that a lot of these modalities out there aren't getting people any better because we're not considering both parts of the body, right? So anybody that is doing some sort of like cognitive behavioral therapy or some sort of talk therapy, I would hope that they also are working with a professional on their physical body, right? They can't be going into those sessions improperly fueled, improperly hydrated, improperly rested, without nervous system tools or practices. Like their body is stuck in a state of fight, flight, or freeze, and they're not even getting the most out of that like brain-based therapy, right? Because their body is constantly then resending signals to their brain that they're under threat and they're under stress. So it's just one of these like bi-directional relationships that I feel like is so misunderstood, and people out there are stuck and they're spinning their wheels trying to use all of these like just brain-based approaches or just body-based approaches, and all they're thinking about is like what they eat, when they eat, how they move their body, how they sleep, what supplements they're taking. I'm like, cool, you're not even paying attention to your head though. And then we have people out there that are spinning their wheels more, looking for, meditation and talk therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, all of these different things, to where it's like neural rewiring, trauma work. And it's like, that's cool, but you're not even thinking about your body, So it's like, what if both of these worlds coexisted together, right? And that's what we're going to talk about today as we start to kind of reunite all of this together. So if we know that we have that vagal nerve, runs from our brain, innervates all of these major organs, and controls a lot of things that are under our like subconscious control, then we have to think it's like, oh, so there's ways that I can tap into this though. Yes, there absolutely is. And this is probably most apparent when we realized less than a decade ago, but more than 80 to 90% of the vagal nerve communication actually happens from the body to the brain, not the other way around, right? So for the first however many decades and centuries of medicine, we were treating it as like the brain controls the body, right? And now we're starting to realize, oh, the body actually can control the brain. And like now we're starting to recognize like, oh, the body that's not a word, majority of it is body to brain. Yes, a solid 80 to 90% of that. So we need to understand like, how can I tap into that? Like this is a super, super powerful way to think about it, right? So for example, when our heart rate is erratic or a heart rate is increased, the brain is going to inhibit cognitive function, right? Any planning, decision making, those go offline, right? Because the body's like, no, you need to fight right now. This is not a time to overanalyze. This is not a time to think about your options. Do not press go. Do not collect $200. Like we are in fight mode, right? To this is like the body flooring the gas pedal, right? It's like, go. So you have to think about it. It's like, oh yeah, when I do feel like in that fight or flight, like my body does not think about creative reasoning or like, rationale. It's just like all of that goes out the window and it's just go mode, right? That's why when we get stuck in that place, we feel anxious. We can't be reasoned with. Someone tells us to calm down and we lose our shit. Like, it's like we cannot rationally put together a thought when we're in that fight or flight. Then when we move though into where a position where our heart rate is more stable, our heart rate is more ordered, the brain actually increases cognitive thinking. It increases positive emotions. It increases memory storage, right? So in that more like rest and digest or parasympathetic side of our nervous system, we think more clearly, we learn more easily, we're more reasonable versus reactionary. And that to the body is like pressing the brakes. So we have two sides. We have that fight or flight, which is pressing the gas. We have the rest and digest, which is pressing the brake. Both of them, we need that. But what we're starting to realize is a majority of that signaling of like which side is appropriate right now is happening from the body to the brain. Like the body is letting the brain know which side should I be turning on, which side is most appropriate right now, right? That's why we always think about like the body connecting to the brain, right? How many phrases do we have out there of like, oh, follow your gut instinct, right? It's like, oh, so follow what my gut is telling my brain to do. Or like the phrase of like, listen to your heart. All of those phrases are very true because we recognize that like what our body feels is what is sending to the brain, right? Tap into that, right? So there's lots of different names for that. We were talking about that last week when I talked about the perfectionist trap, right? And part of that perfectionist trap is losing that inner knowing. We lose connection to that inner voice or lose connection to that intuition when we're under that more perfectionist type tendency, because that perfectionist type tendency is sticking us in that fight or flight mode. Right? So we lose that inner knowing, we lose that whole gut instinct, we lose the ability to like listen to our heart. And now all of a sudden we're like stuck and we have what we call vagal nerve dysfunction, right? We've tried to cut off that like body to brain. And now all we're left with is the 10% that is brain to body. Probably not a really great method to the madness, right? When it comes to trying to live to our best health potential, reverse chronic disease, improve daily quality of life, lose weight. I mean, regardless of what it is. So that's why so many perfectionists really struggle with like low vagal nerve activity. And they struggle a lot with nervous system regulation issues. It's also why perfectionists are more trended towards like burnout, anxiety, and all of the physical issues that come with it, right? It's no different than anybody else being stuck in fight or flight because of a trauma response, or stuck in fight or flight because of a high stress job or lack of community, lack of support. Like there's so many reasons why our body is going to tell our brain, turn on that fight or flight state, because that is necessary at this point in time, right? So biggest things I want you guys to kind of realize here as we pause for a moment is like, okay, so I have two sides of my nervous system: sympathetic, fight or flight, freeze; parasympathetic, rest, digest, heal. And that is going to be communicated from the body to the brain and the brain to the body view through something that we call the vagal nerve, right? So once you kind of recognize that and recognize that most of the inputs from the vagal nerve come from the body to the brain, now we can start to put two and two together of why the body is going to physically feel nervous system dysfunction, right? So I'm just going to run through a few different like signs, symptoms, syndromes that are associated with nervous system dysfunction, because a lot of people just don't connect these two, right? So number one would be like headaches and migraines are a really big sign of disconnection of that nervous system. Anxiety. Another one being a little bit odd, but I see it quite frequently, is trouble swallowing. They feel like there's like a lump in their throat. They feel like they can't swallow pills very well. Sometimes it even feels like their throat like tightening or like tightness in their chest. But had that conversation with someone earlier this week about like trouble swallowing and her nervous system function. GI dysfunction is very common here, whether it's IBS, IBD, gastroparesis, reflux, indigestion, constipation. So like slow motility patterns, definitely a sign of some nervous system dysregulation. Gallbladder stones is another common one, as well as like poor satiety signaling. So some people that feel like they're like always hungry and can't get satiated or can't get full. Brain fog, poor memory, struggle learning, right? That's a perfect example where if we're stuck in that fight or flight, our body's learning centers are like shut off, which was also really cool because I was having this conversation again with one of my clients last week. And we were talking and she's like, wow, she's like, I never made this connection. She's like, I think I've been in that fight or flight for a long time. She's like, even thinking back, like, childhood. I'm like, were you ever like diagnosed or struggled with like a learning disorder? And she looked at me and she's like, how did you know? I was like, just saying. I was like, I throwing it out there as it's not uncommon. So it's like a lot of these things are kind of coming to light, but we have the wrong way to kind of go about them. Like nobody is talking about the nervous system. So people are just running around out there like self-medicating. Dangerous slope. Or individuals that are like easily triggered, hypervigilant, those types of folks are also usually struggling with some nervous system dysfunction. So really this fancy way of saying that we lost connection with that vagal nerve. We also have like stuck ourselves in this fight or flight and we can't get out of it, right? And losing this has a lot of different terms. Being out of sync with the two sides of our nervous system often is called incoherence. And being in alignment with those two sides of our nervous system is usually called coherence, right? If you're interested in all of this, there's a really cool company called Heart Math. And Heart Math talks a lot about heart coherence and incoherence patterns, very similar to what I'm talking about today. Another way that I've heard it described and learned it myself was a term called resonance. And you think about resonance like in musical terms, like if you were to hold like a wine glass and like tap a fork on it, right? You hear the vibration, you even can feel the vibration, but you hear the resonance. It's the same mode where it's like, oh, I'm flowing, and that energy and sound is flowing equally between like parasympathetic and sympathetic. I'm not like stuck in one or the other, right? So I talk about it as resonance because just like any other muscle, this can be trained, right? So even if someone is stuck in fight or flight or struggling with that, we can actually train that and move away from that, right? So we have to realize though that this nervous system is usually under subconscious control, right? Like unconscious. So it's like, how in the world can I train something that is like subconscious, right? It's controlling my heart rate. It's controlling my digestion. Like I've had women in here that are like, yeah, I would love to be able to think my way into a poop. I'm like, yeah, but that doesn't happen. We can't like consciously control our bowel habits, right? So we have to start to indirectly think about this a little bit and recognize that when we think about that, that's only someone that's considering the brain talking to the body, but not the body talking to the brain. So once we know that the vagus nerve innervates all of these different organs, we have to start taking it back and recognize like, what do I have control over, right? So the biggest one here being our breath. Right? We have to start thinking about how we breathe, disordered patterns of breathing, because without that deep diaphragmatic breathing, we don't get the opportunity to activate the vagal nerve, right? And if we don't get the opportunity to activate the vagal nerve, then we can't control things like blood pressure. We can't control things like heart rate. Therefore, we can't control things like thought patterns. And the role of like training and strengthening your vagus nerve to effectively move between that rest and digest state, to me, is like reaches to all corners of health and should be really like the future of medicine. And that's why I'm talking about it today, so that you can say like, oh yeah, Lauryn told me about that years ago before it actually became like a thing, right? You can practice it even now. So rewiring the stress response and kind of training and strengthening the vagal nerve happens just like any other muscle. So I'm going to give you guys some high level. I don't expect you guys to necessarily feel like a resonance training master by today, but I want to give you some ideas of like, oh, so when she talks about like resonance training or training my heart coherence, she's talking about this vagal nerve and how can I really tap into this vagal nerve? What does that look like widespread across all symptoms, syndromes, and even the goals that I have for myself? So training this is really going to be kind of, I outlined it into a 3-step process, but even beyond each one of those, it kind of spans out. So I'll give you, like I said, kind of high level to leave you guys with today. So when I think about the first steps towards aligning your resonance or aligning your heart coherence, number one is going to be measuring your baseline heart rate variability. I've talked about heart rate variability before, or HRV. If you're not familiar with HRV, you can go back to a previous Learn with Flo episode, because I talk about it a lot and in very, very detailed. I'll go back and try to find that for you guys and link it. But HRV stands for heart rate variability, and it is one of the most objective ways that we can actually measure the body being between rest and digest and fight or flight. It's an objective way to measure it versus always just like feeling it. So the higher your HRV, the more you're in that like rest and digest pattern, and the lower your HRV score, the more we're in that like fight or flight, right? The lower the HRV means we have lower stress resilience. It means that we're out of alignment with our resonance or our heart coherence. So you can use lots of different wearables like Whoop, Aura. That Heart Math Institute also has some of their own apps and devices. And you want to compare this heart rate variability or this HRV about every 4 weeks, right? There's going to be lots of different things that I would encourage you to implement, all the way from different nutrition, different lifestyle, different sleep, supplementation. I mean, there's going to be all sorts of physical, mental, and emotional things that all are going to come back into how is my HRV responding. That's going to give you a really key indicator of, am I training this vagal nerve and getting stronger? Am I spending more time in that rest and digest? So number one is we kind of got to, if we're going to measure anything, or if you're going to manage anything, you got to measure it, right? So just measuring and having an understanding of your average baseline HRV, very, very helpful, which is why I love my wearables. Number two is then once you have your baseline HRV, now we need to start to come to a come to Jesus moment here about the potential barriers that are keeping our HRV low or are keeping us out of alignment with our nervous system, or are like throwing us out of coherence or into incoherence. Huge list of these, right? And this is where I would definitely recommend working with a practitioner, because you're probably going to need some additional testing here. You're probably going to need some additional kind of like some protocols, some nutrition advice, some lifestyle tools, some supplementation patterns and things like that to work out of these. But number one is going to be dysfunctional breathing patterns can throw us into a state of incoherence, stress, inflammation, blood sugar imbalance, diabetes, infections, dysbiosis, metabolic syndrome, head injury, low thyroid function, gut infections, toxin exposure, pesticide. I mean, there's mold, the list goes on and on. So everybody will kind of find like, what are my triggers that are keeping my body in a fight or flight type pattern from a physical perspective, right? So we'll have to tackle those first using things like labs and practitioner work. And then number three is then we want to come in and implement daily vagal nerve strengthening practices, right? This is where we start to get into diaphragmatic breath work, different nasal breathing patterns, cold exposure, acupuncture, visceral manipulation therapy, circadian rhythm, connection to deep sleep, balancing hormones, balancing blood sugar. Like all of these types of things are going to then not just prevent you from being in that fight or flight, but then we need to move towards more of that parasympathetic rest and digest, more towards a place of alignment and coherence. So I just don't want anyone to think that it's just about removing like the physical stressors and then now all of a sudden I'm in this parasympathetic mode. It's like, no, you have to remove, but then you have to strengthen and build, right? So that kind of becomes a sticking point. And this becomes kind of an ongoing venture and an ongoing project. It's not like I start and I stop. This is something that happens behind the scenes of all of my client sessions and all of the things that I'm building and teaching them to be able to do to manage their health proactively themselves. So I shared this quote with you last time and I'll share it with you again because I think it kind of wraps up our combos here. But this quote says, it's a holistic state in which your words, behaviors, relationships, actions, and beliefs reflect the person that you want to be, an alignment of the mind and the body. That is resonance. That is coherence, right? So it really just kind of brings back full circle of recognizing that, to me, the future of medicine is someone that's uniting this brain and body approach, and not just like cutting the head off at the neck and trying to change like brain and neural patterns and thoughts and beliefs without recognizing that a body that is in fight or flight is not going to accept that. The second that you put the head back on the body, zing, all the shit comes back, right? So we have to have some methods here to unite both of these. So I would encourage you, if you, like I said, have either like maybe been in that boat where you're like, I'm that person that's only ever tried to work on the physical, but not on the mental, or I'm that person that's tried a lot of different avenues on the mental and I don't feel the physical getting any better. You found your missing piece with one side or the other. So once you kind of know that, then you can jump in and look for those resources that help you like unite them both together. If you're looking for a resource like that, I think you would be an excellent candidate for my 16-week Revive, Restore, Renew You program. That is something that you do not have to wait for. It is something we can jump in together one-on-one at any point in time. So there's a link in my bio on my Instagram to apply for that if you're interested. And I take a certain number of applications each month. So if you're interested in that, please submit your application to review for spots for September. And you don't have to wait for that. You can apply at any time. So excited to continue these types of conversations with you guys. Hopefully you can nerd out with me as we talk a little bit of my woo-woo magic and appreciate where that's coming from, because it all comes back together, right? So can't talk about the brain without talking about the body. So incorporate some of this resonance training mindset and these resonance training practices, and ask questions if you have them, and be on the lookout for our new month and Learn with Lo after Labor Day. Bye, everybody.